Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, James Protin. Every week I will be sharing the experiences that have defined my journey and talking with people who have their own powerful story to tell. It's about doing better and being better in life, business, and all things in between. The visually inclined can catch us on YouTube, or you can check us out on just about every podcast platform. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Our guest today is Tanya Bashor. Tanya, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invite.
No, listen, I've been looking forward to talking with you. I just figured, well, if we're going to have coffee, we'll just have Nick film it. We'll just,
for sure,
but you do, and I'm going to let you describe, tell us about your job and what services you provide. But I'm fascinated by this because it's something that is in the news all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's, narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic tendencies, all of these different things. You coach this and you tell us about this. Tell us about it, and then we can get into how you got into it.
Sure. So the word narcissist is the buzzword right now, right?
Yes.
For the people that are out there that are not so nice. And so how did I get into this? Such a good question. I came over to the States in 1991. The intention was to be here for a year.
That's not a Pittsburgh accent?
No, it's not a Pittsburgh accent. The intention was to be here for just a year, but I met a guy, and as they say, the rest is history, right? So I was married for 22 years, and I left that marriage 4 times in total. And I always pride myself, and it makes me laugh because the average is 7 times when you're in an abusive relationship. So I'm
really?
above average, but still.
7
good
times? Good
God, 4 times. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, the 4th time, finally filed for divorce and moved on with my life. But it wasn't until after that divorce that I started to kind of look at myself and do my own personal development work. And I went to San Diego and I worked with a coach for 12 months.
Okay.
In a coaching program, went and visited with her for a couple of months and just did a whole bunch of self-excavating type stuff. Like, what the hell is wrong with me was what I went in with. What I came out with was what happened to me.
You left that abusive marriage thinking something was wrong with you.
Absolutely, as do many women that have been through this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I left that thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? Mm-hmm. What happened? And I was a former version of myself. I had very little self-confidence, very low self-esteem. I second-guessed everything. I put on this brave persona. I worked at a bank and was a, executive at a bank and had this powerful job that I was really, really good at. But behind closed doors, I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. I had zero self-confidence, zero self-esteem. And I was just like, what the hell is wrong with me? So having gone through that 12-month program with that coach, I very quickly realized that the behaviors that I had been subjected to were never my fault. Mm-hmm. And what had happened to me over this 22 years was a drip feed of emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. And so after going through that coaching program, it ended at the end of March, right before COVID hit. And of course, we're all at home with not much to do during COVID. And I was online searching and I'm like, I want to go work with a coach and figure out what I want to do with my life. Mm-hmm. I want those 22 years to count for something. And so I reached out to a high-performance coach who trained with Tanya Bashor, and I worked with her for 3 months during COVID. And she very quickly uncovered what my purpose was going to be, what my passion is. And I realized that I wanted to use those 22 years to help educate other women that had been through that and help them not take several years to kind of recover and get beyond it, but be able to come up with a program.
Because you were several years away from, outside of that relationship. You were remarried.
I was remarried at that time. Yeah. And I was, 4 or 5 years into my marriage to my current husband. And so I worked with this coach and I realized, okay, there's something here. And she actually introduced me to Caroline Strawson, who is a narcissistic abuse specialist in England. And Caroline had just created the very first cohort of a coaching program.
It's kind of ironic.
Isn't it?
Yeah. You went full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I have this huge network of coaches that I trained with in England. So I ended up going through Caroline Strawson's coaching program. I ended up certifying as a Trauma Informed Narcissistic Abuse Specialist, and also a brain spotting practitioner, and also a certified hypnotherapist. So I trained for a whole period of 12 to 14 months.
Okay, I can understand 1 and 3. What is brain spotting?
So brain spotting is a modality where we use a pointer to find the spot that the person is looking at that holds the traumatic event or memory in their mind. And we will actually hold that pointer while the person's looking at it, and they will sit and look at that pointer and then process from that space. It's a very deep meditative state. There's bilateral music that gets played. And the brain will kind of make sense of it all and timestamp that event into the past so that it doesn't always activate you the next time you think about it. Sure. It's a really powerful modality. Wow. I love working with that.
Yeah, that is very cool and scary at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, so you wield a lot of influence over your clients or for your clients, not over, but for your clients when you're doing this counseling. Because, you know, we talked earlier, and when the average person hears that, okay, Tanya was in an abusive relationship, they'll start looking for bruises. Yeah. They think physical abuse. That's where the mind goes to. Yeah. But you had talked about emotional, mental, and I think something that's really fascinating is financial abuse. Yep. There's so many different types of abusive relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about the financial abuse part of it, because oftentimes this doesn't get talked about. And it's one of the things that I coach on. So financial abuse can be as simple as the person not allowing you to go to work, not wanting to watch your kids, or making it really difficult for you to go to work because they don't want to watch the kids. They can spend all of your money and keep you in debt so that you don't have any money to be able to leave them.
Right.
They can rack up credit cards so much that you have to refinance your house and you're never getting ahead.
Sure.
There's many different ways that financial abuse comes about, and it is all a form of control. Just like most narcissistic tendency type people have this control issue. Right. And financial abuse is just another way that you can be abused. Sure. You know, we were talking earlier about not having the bruises. And so we all think about, you know, October is domestic violence month, right? Sure. And we all think about domestic violence as somebody being, you know, strangled or punched, or you've got those physical bruises that people can see. Oh my gosh, that person's been abused. And our hearts are like, oh my God, that poor woman. But here I am, not a bruise. No one can see anything is wrong. Right. And yet what's happening behind closed doors is horrendous. Sure. Not being allowed to sleep, constantly being berated and screamed at and yelled at, and not being able to sleep. Sleep deprivation is the worst. It is a form of abuse.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I think for me, just getting the word out, you don't have to be hit to be abused. You can be emotionally, psychologically, and financially abused as well. And no one's going to even see that it's happening.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, you yourself are an example of that. You were a very high functioning professional. Yep. You had a very responsible and demanding career. Yep. And nobody, I would have imagined that nobody saw in any indication in you that this was happening at home.
Exactly. Until the end. And then they got to see it firsthand because he would come to my job and it got really ugly.
Well, then it spilled out.
It spilled out. And then everyone's like, oh, now I see. Okay, now it makes sense. Yeah.
And I think we should be very clear that, you know, narcissistic personality disorder, for example, is not gender specific. We're not talking about men here.
No, we're not.
I mean, women can, it goes both ways.
It does. There are a lot of narcissistic women out there. It's not gender specific. And let's talk too about narcissistic traits versus narcissistic personality disorder. Because
what is the difference?
There is a huge difference. So we all, by nature, and it starts as teenagers, we think about ourselves, right?
Sure.
If you've had kids, you know that. Like,
to a certain
they're
extent,
self-centered, right?
It's a good thing. I mean, you really have to, I mean, you talk about self-love and self-respect and all those things. You know,
want to have some type of narcissism because that's self-preservation, right?
Yes.
We have to think about ourselves. So there's a healthy amount of it. It's when it becomes unhealthy
Right.
and it completely all consumes you. That's when it becomes a problem. So narcissistic traits can be things like, being concerned about the way that you look. Most normal people want to look nice,
Sure.
right? And that's a normal thing. But when you absolutely obsess about it and you have to like always have full makeup on if you're a woman, you can't leave the house without it. Like that's something that's taken a little bit to the extreme.
Okay.
And when you add a lot of the different things that I'm about to describe to the extreme, all together is when it can become a big problem. So narcissism is a lack of empathy, not being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand how they're feeling.
Okay.
It's also about wanting to be praised verbally, affirmed. Oh my gosh, you're amazing. I can't believe how incredible you are. All of that positive affirmation. It's also about that sense of control and being controlling over other people.
Okay.
And so it's like, yes, you can join my networking group, but you have to do it this way. Every time somebody comes in, we have to say this. And,
Sure.
there's a lot of control
Right.
around what happens in that environment by the
Right.
person leading it. So, then you look at narcissistic personality disorder, which a psychiatrist is the only one that can diagnose that. So there's 8 or 9 different traits. It's in the DSM-5. And the person must have at least 5 of those traits to be considered diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay.
And so you can look that up in the DSM and read what those are.
And Flora, what is DSM?
Oh, sorry. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's the Bible, if you will, of the medical world.
Okay.
So when you look at that list, it's going to be really hard to, unless you're, a doctor, a medical doctor, hard to diagnose somebody.
Right.
And here's the thing. No narcissist ever wakes up one morning and says, I think there might be a problem with me. I think I'm going to go and
get
checked out by a shrink to see if I have narcissistic personality disorder, because they are completely in denial that anything is even an issue.
Right.
So most of the time, what we're dealing with, truthfully, is somebody who has high narcissistic traits.
Right.
And so they're, usually it's because they are emotionally wounded somehow. They have low self-esteem and they're trying to hide it.
Sure.
They've had a childhood with, adverse problems that have happened to them as children. They have either been in an abusive relationship in the past, and now they're like taking on a lot of those traits and giving it out to another person. There's a whole bunch of different reasons that people can be that way.
Sure.
But having narcissistic traits and being just a toxic person, which is, toxic used to be the big buzzword.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Versus narcissistic personality disorder are 2 complete extremes. And just like any disorder, there is a spectrum. So you can show some signs of being narcissistic, and then you can have full-fledged narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
So here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. There are some psychologists and psychiatrists out there right now who are basically saying all of this is a bunch of crap.
Really?
All of these diagnoses, bipolar, narcissistic personality disorder, all of these disorders, ADHD, ADD, like all these acronyms that we give people. And there are some people out there right now who are advocating that these are all just trauma responses from a human perspective. It's a living experience that we've all experienced from whatever has gone on in our lives up until now. And now, we're just slapping a label on it so we can give medication to these people to make it okay for them to treat people that way.
Well, that's medicine right now, right? That's the medical profession is to medicate, not,
exactly.
And what you just said is powerful, because all of those symptoms, are very subtle, right? Because you could look at anybody that uses social media. Right?
Yeah.
So you put a post on social media, you are putting that out there for people to like it, for people to comment positively about it.
The selfie world that we're in.
Well, you're exactly right. And Nick and I, when we do this show, we can sit here and say it's about the message. Yeah. It is for us. It truly is. But people out there are going to say, yeah, right. Right. Do you count how many? Yeah, of course we do. Because doing this in order to make this podcast the best we can possibly make it, we have to watch trends and things like that.
Yep.
So there are a lot of subtleties in those different types of I don't want to say symptoms, but for lack of a better word. So when you think about that, the average person who is on social media, who is sharing their life, their highlight reel and all those things, I think that falls under the category, the lower end of the spectrum. And then you have the example that I used earlier is Mr. Trump, and I won't call him president, but Mr. Trump, who in my mind has to be the extreme example on the high end of the spectrum, because this is someone who puts no value on any human life other than his own. I mean, that is so extreme. It's hard for me to even get around it, and you can't get away from it.
How many men of that age do you know have to comb their hair over because they're going bald, and they tan their skin, and they have to look the best at all times?
For their eyes.
Like, come on.
And it's and
too much of it is wrapped up in that.
Degrade other people to make themselves look good.
Better. Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. That to me is a very subtle sign, because I know a lot of people like that. Instead of saying, Tanya, you did great.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, but I did this. You have to degrade somebody to elevate yourself. That's, I have seen so many intelligent people, men and women, get trapped into these types of relationships.
It is so prevalent. And the sad thing is that if you've been in one of these relationships, unless you get help, unless you really unpack your suitcase and take a look at what happened to you and why, you will go back into another one and another one and another one. You won't break that cycle.
Sure.
You won't see what those red flags are. You won't understand why you've been attracted to that type of person.
Right.
It starts with you. All healing is self-healing. All the things that I teach my clients are all things that they do for themselves.
And I love the name of your business, Impart Clarity.
Impart Clarity,
and it's exactly what you just said. Because, when you're in that moment, in that fog, right, you can't see clearly.
You don't see it. And in fact, I consider myself to be a really intelligent person. I didn't see it. I left that relationship going, what the hell is wrong with me? There was nothing wrong with me. Now I ask myself the question, wow, do you realize what happened to you? And I look at myself now with much more grace and with more compassion and with self-love, which I didn't have back then.
Right.
And that's the key.
And I can relate to that, because I was on the other side of that. And when I was divorced, I really, after the dust settled and all the shouting stopped, I started to question my own behaviors as to, was I this guy? Did I do this?
Yeah.
And it took a long time for me to understand what was going on behind the scenes myself, and how that I was projecting that on my ex-wife, right? And it took a lot of grace and empathy and compassion, self-acceptance and accepting responsibility for those actions to get to the point where, I wasn't, but I wasn't this, I wasn't that, so it's a difficult, it's a fine line at times.
There are a lot of women actually that, as they're coaching with me, will ask me the question, am I the narcissist? Is it me? No, actually what you're describing is reactive abuse. So as they are abusing you, you are sticking up for yourself and you're retaliating back because you don't know any different way of dealing with that situation.
Sure.
And so, oftentimes people are like, maybe I am the problem. No, you're not the problem, because you're actually asking those self-reflecting type questions, and you're being open to the possibility that you are the problem, whereas a narcissist would never be open to that possibility.
Right.
They are not the problem. You're the problem. You're the one with the problem. And that's where gaslighting comes in. You've heard that term, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
I'll say to you, hey, Jim, when you said this, it really made me feel this way. And you're like, I never said that, first of all. Or I said that, but I didn't mean it that way. I meant this. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, confused by the reality of what did I hear? Did I hear him say that? I don't know if I did or not. And then you start thinking, am I going crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all part of it.
Yeah. And like I said, I've been through that. And, you know, I'm sure there was a time, and maybe still to this day, that my ex-wife would have put me in that spectrum. And for a moment, I put myself there until I took ownership of my actions and realized that, you know, I did that. I did this. And, you know, it makes you think. It makes you really, really think about as an adult, whether you're male or female. It really makes you think about your actions when you go back and you hear these things and you think about past relationships, even your current relationship.
Yep.
You know, it really makes you think about responsibility and accountability as an adult human being.
So I'm remarried now, and what you bring up is a really good point. So even as recent as last year, I found myself sabotaging my existing relationship with this lovely man because it felt so safe. Something needed to be wrong.
Something had to be wrong.
Right? So there wasn't anything wrong. So here I am trying to create something wrong. And thank God for this work, because I immediately saw that I was doing it. I gave myself a time out. I did some journaling. I did some reflecting. I did a lot of hypnosis on myself.
Sure.
I started thinking about, okay, is this really what you want to do to this? You want to throw this away? No. Those patterns creep back in.
Oh, so easily.
So easily.
And, you know, we're habitual, even addictive creatures.
Yeah.
You know, humans we fall into a habit, even if it's a bad habit, if we get comfortable with it, and we can get addicted to anything.
Yeah.
You know, I drink coffee. That's why we're in coffee shops all the time. And my wife will tell me, Terry will say, you know, you're addicted to coffee. Not, that's ridiculous. No, I'm not. I can stop drinking coffee at any time. So I try.
And then you get a headache.
And then I get a headache. And I go get a cup of coffee. Do you know what she did to me once? She literally, without me knowing, right? She started substituting the half caffeine, and then total decaf over a period of time. I had no idea.
She weaned you off.
I had no idea, you know, but I couldn't do it myself, right? So, you know, but thinking about how, and I still have bad habits. Everybody does. There's things
we
that,
all do.
you know, I do things sometimes. Why did I do that? I know better than it, you know. But this is such a fascinating subject, and I honestly think we could sit and talk about this all day. But I want to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah.
You tell me about growing up in England, because I'm fascinated. the Great Britain, the whole thing, the empire, just it just fascinates me. So, what was it like being a child and growing up in England?
Oh my goodness.
First of all, would you just from a small town, a city?
Yeah, so a pretty small town. It was an agricultural town. There was a cattle market every Wednesday. So my brother and I would go to the cattle market. That's where all the cows and the sheep and the pigs were. I still have this affinity for pigs to this day. My dad laughs at me. He'll pick me up from the airport. I'm like, can we take that particular road? So I can see the pigs in the pen, and he just kind of shakes his head and laughs at me. But I grew up in a rural town. My parents were, working class people. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a bricklayer.
Okay.
My brother and I lived in a really lovely house that my dad built. He was a bricklayer. So we lived in a really lovely home. But until that time, we lived in council housing. So subsidized housing. So my parents, really worked hard for a living and got us to where we needed to go. So in high school, because I was living in this lovely house, I got picked on at school and got picked on the bus. And, my parents were...
It's the illusion of privilege.
Yeah. My parents were, now I look at it based on my training, looking back, of course, my parents were both very, very codependent. My dad was very dissociated. My father's mom died when he was 9.
Okay.
And my mom's mom was an alcoholic. And so both of my parents got raised with these inner child wounds.
Sure.
And they got married real young, 18, 19 years old. My parents are really young. And they had my brother and I. And then they bust their butts. They worked really, really hard for their dream of owning their own house. And we got that. And when my parents were, when I was 16, my parents got divorced. And so, I look back at that now and I see the writing on the wall. I saw exactly what was happening, didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. So at the age of 16, here I am staying home with my dad, raising my brother, trying to go to college. And then I'm like, you know what? I forget it. I can't do this. It's too hard. I drop out of college. I get a job as a teller at a bank. I'll do this until I find something better. And then 30 years of banking, right? So, growing up in England was lovely. It was very simple. We lived near an apple orchard, so we would take the dog for a walk every Sunday. My brother and I had two really close friends that I lived with and lived close with, and I would go to church with. My parents were atheists, so I went to church with my next door neighbor. So I grew up very faith-filled, but my parents used to call me Religious Annie. So there was all of that. So the dynamics were different. And at that time, I realized now I was choosing my own path.
Yes,
absolutely. I wasn't in alignment with what they
Mm-hmm.
were all about. I was doing my own thing even at that time.
That's wonderful.
So, and then I got married at the age of 19.
Okay.
Because I was basically running away from home. He was in the SAS, the Special Air Service. And it was a crazy life. I'd have to check under my car for bombs because that's when the IRA stuff was going on.
Yeah.
And I lived on Army housing on the campus. Sure. So it was just a really strange time.
My youngest son is in the military. He's in the Air Force. Active duty right now.
Young and stupid, broke the wife code, had an affair, not proud of it, got divorced, lived with him for about 2 years, and then found out after we were a year into it that he was actually in the SAS as well, but didn't tell me. So ended up living with him. We ended up splitting up. He had a motorcycle accident, lost his right leg in a motorcycle accident. Goodness. I went to the infirmary to see him, only to find out that he had been seeing somebody in Northern Ireland where he had been stationed. So basically, I ran away from England. That's the truth. So I came here in 1991 and worked as a nanny for one of the Penguin players, which was a really fun job.
That had to be, and I love the fact, and the people that watch this podcast will love this. That you mentioned that you taught Evgeny Malkin how to speak English.
Yeah, no, it was Yama Yager.
Yama Yager. Oh, okay, Malkin. Okay.
Yeah, he had literally just got to the Penguins, and we sat on the bleachers, and I was teaching him like basic English, hello, goodbye, and all of that fun stuff.
That's very funny.
Going to the Igloo Club, hanging out with the wives. So I worked for Peter Taglianetti, and so Allison would kind of take me wherever the wives would go. I was in my early 20s at the time. And
that had to be fun because that was the Stanley Cup.
You know what? I had no clue what the hell I was even getting into. I'm like, who? You mean they pay people to play hockey? This is insane. So yeah, I did that for just over a year, and that's when I met my husband, and the rest is history, as they say. So growing up in England, I would say, to answer your question, was a very simple life. It was family oriented. It was very, very simple. We didn't have computer games. We didn't have cell phones.
See, that's
like
my
all of that
impression
stuff, right?
of growing up in English countryside would be just a simpler life.
I mean, I remember Christmas Eve with a bunch of friends. Here we are in our 15, 16, 17, walking down these dark country lanes, going to the church to go to midnight mass. And, candles lit everywhere in the church, and coming out of there just laughing and carry on, and then going and drinking wine in the orchard and just doing crazy stuff like that, ringing the bells in the church, learning how to be a bell ringer. In school, I played violin, so I was first chair in an orchestra. I was very much involved with theater. I was kind of nerdy growing up. And then I went off the deep end at the age of 16 and was like sleeping around, like trying to figure out, like it was all because I was broken inside, raised by codependent parents. My parents got divorced. I'm like, now what? Where is my self-worth? Who am I?
Who am I?
Yeah. What do I want? And now I look back at that and I go, oh my goodness, I was the perfect candidate to be ending up with this narcissistic person.
Right.
Because I didn't have self-esteem. And I thought that I could fix him because
you're exactly what he was looking for.
Yes, I was exactly what he was looking for. And then when you get into these relationships and they love bomb you, the first date we went on was up on Mount Washington. Not Lamont. What's the other one that was up there on the hill? I forget what it was called in the 90s. But anyway, we went to this beautiful restaurant. He had our names engraved on matchboxes, for goodness sake. Like, I remember coming home from our first date, and my girlfriend.
Your first date.
The first date. I remember coming home from that date, and I told my girlfriend she was taking care of the Taglianetti kids so I could go on my date, right? And I came home and I go, I think I'm going to marry him. She goes, are you kidding me? I'm like, no, I seriously do. Like, that's how love bombed I was. Day one.
Day one.
And so when you get in those type of relationships, you open up. You tell them your deepest, darkest secrets.
Everything.
I confess to, sleeping around and all the things I wasn't proud of, and being married for a year and a half and cheating on my husband and all the things, thinking I could pour my soul into this man and have him trust, I could be trustworthy, right?
Right.
Not realizing that later on down the road, those exact same things would be used against me.
He was putting arrows in the quiver to use
for
against
real.
you later.
Yeah,
that's
knowing what my triggers were, knowing the things that he could push the buttons off. Yeah.
Wow. That's, and that is such, whenever the deeper the relationship you're in, okay, the deeper in love that you think you are, right? the more you will go after those triggers and those pinch points, and it's not because you're being vicious or trying to, but because you have, it's passion turned the wrong way.
Yes,
right.
You're
it's
absolutely
upside down.
right. You're absolutely right. And when you are in a relationship, and I know you can relate to this because your relationship now is good, right?
Yeah,
when you compare
absolutely.
it to what was happening before, and then you compare how you are now, it's really hard because you're just like, how on earth did I not see my part in it? Because we both play a part in it, right?
Absolutely.
I did too. I talk about his narcissistic tendencies, but my God, I have them as well.
Absolutely. And I had said to you earlier that I had a really bad marriage to a really good woman.
Yeah.
We were very young. By the time we realized that we didn't really know each other, we didn't really have anything in common.
Sure.
We had 3 children.
It was too late. Yep.
We were both way too immature for that responsibility. I, in particular, was. And I didn't handle it well. There's no way I handled it well. And when I look back at how I didn't realize in the moment that I was projecting what was going on, what I didn't like about myself, what I did. I was projecting that on my wife and children.
Yeah.
And it wasn't intentional.
No.
I wasn't malicious in any way. I wasn't, but I was in a place of selfishness brought on by immaturity. And, and then later after I got out of that, I was diagnosed with depression. And talking about, how when your kids, with ADHD and all that, I was talking to some old timers, and they said, we never had that stuff when we were little because we acted like that our parents smacked us and we didn't do it anymore.
Exactly.
And they were making a joke about it, but that's how it was then.
Yeah.
There wasn't a warm and fuzzy. You were expected to do certain things. So when I was diagnosed and I looked back and I thought, wow, this probably started when I was about 12 years old.
Oh yeah.
So you could start to see, and then I could see how the role it played in the marriage and how I parented my children.
Hurt people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They do. And,
that sounds cliche, but it is so true.
It is so true. So, my ex-husband came from 2 alcoholic parents. He would go from bar to bar looking for them after school. And I see exactly how it was created. Captain of the football team, homecoming king, the whole thing. Like everybody's like, oh my God, this guy, he's the best. That level of grandioseness that we talk about with grandiose narcissists, right?
Absolutely.
It was a perfect storm.
Yeah.
And I can see it now with great compassion.
And you were the perfect prey.
And with great empathy.
Sure.
But you're right. I was the perfect prey. So codependency and narcissism are a match made in hell or in heaven, depending on which way you look at it. But it really is. One attracts the other.
Yeah.
The narcissist thinks that, they can control this person because they have very little self-esteem, and the codependent wants to give this person praise and take care of them. And so the codependent gives, the narcissist takes, and, everybody's happy until they're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. That is just crazy. Now, you have 2 children from that marriage.
I do.
They're adults.
I do. My son is actually, he just passed the bar. He's an attorney. And my daughter is an English teacher. She lives in Spain.
Really?
So, yeah, both of my children, thank God for the grace of God, are doing pretty great in life and, pretty successful in what they do. But it's done a number on them too, know?
The fact that they were able to overcome that childhood, that trauma, because that had to be traumatic for them.
Oh, yeah.
Leaving 4 times, going through all of those things, that impacted them.
Yes, it did.
Probably more than you.
Oh, yeah. I do know that it impacted them more than me. And so, my advice to someone, if they're in a really bad relationship right now and you're staying for the sake of the kids, please don't do that.
I did
please
that.
Don't
and that
do
was,
that.
that was one of the reasons why I feel that my marriage ended traumatically the way it did, is simply because the marriage was over probably 10 years before it ended.
Yep.
And that, we'll get the kids, get them out. And when we did ultimately split up, 2 of our kids were in college, had started college, and the third was in high school.
Yeah.
So, but, almost made it, but man, that last 10, it was tough. It was brutal. The arguing and the fighting and just we were completely separate, living in the same house.
Yeah.
It was a traumatic thing. So you're right. It's something that when I think everybody should try counseling. Everybody should at least should try to make it work. And marriage is worth that. Every marriage is worth the effort.
Agree.
But I think once you get to the point where, and you know what that is, that point.
Yeah. When you know.
Then you have to walk away.
Yeah.
You have to just let's do this. Whether it's for the best interest of the kids or safety, whatever the case may be. But to prolong it doesn't do anybody any good.
Sad. I think back now to some of the things that I would say to my son. I would say things like, just because your dad is treating me this way doesn't mean that this is an appropriate way to be treated. And I would say things to my daughter like, hey, you should never be treated this way by someone.
Sure.
And this is not how a husband treats his wife.
Oh, that is so important.
But the sad thing is that I was not teaching them as a role model. I wasn't, giving them the example that they needed. I was telling them to do one thing and I was doing another.
Yeah.
That was a terrible way to raise children.
Yeah.
And, for probably the first 3 or 4 years after my divorce, I saw a therapist the entire time I was married to my ex-husband. I saw probably 4 or 5 therapists over those 20 years. But after getting divorced, I had a lot of work to do on healing my own guilt and my own shame around putting my children through that, right? And, it's been a struggle for them too. There have been portions of my son's adult life where he has not had a relationship with his dad. He's chosen to just not see him. And now it's a relationship where it's guarded. He sees him under his terms and conditions. And it's very surface. He loves his dad. Of course he does.
Sure.
So does my daughter, but they recognize the tendencies and they understand his behaviors. And now that I do the work that I do, I'm really educating them on why he does what he does. And they see it. And both children are so empathetic and so well-rounded and both do their own work. They both see therapists. They're really good kids.
Yeah. And I think you alluded to, and it didn't say that, narcissistic personality disorder sounds like this is a terrible, terrible human being. But most people, I would think most people, not all, but most people get to that point because they're broken. They get there from a place of brokenness.
Yep.
So, and again, like you said, hurt people hurt people. Yep. And, I can't even, you're giving me kind of like a free therapy session, actually, because, when I'm thinking, we're having this conversation, and I'm thinking about all these things, how when I was growing up, my father was a teacher and he was gregarious and outgoing, but he had that at home.
Yeah.
He was shy and introverted and didn't talk and he never told me do this or do that. Right. But he made sure I watched everything he did. Okay. The way he lived his life. So consequently, I picked up all of his good traits and all of the bad ones. And he wasn't perfect.
Yep.
He wasn't perfect. And, there was a long time where I put my father up on this pedestal.
Yeah.
Not because he deserved to be there, but because I needed him to be there.
Sure.
I needed him to be that guy that he wasn't.
Yep.
Right. And he wasn't a mean, but he was a very flawed human being.
Yeah.
Right. And I convinced myself that he wasn't until I was older and those flaws came out in me.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So, I mean, I feel some empathy toward these people.
Sure.
But also I understand how toxic and how traumatic that is to be on either side of those relationships.
Yep. I teach my clients that it's okay to even feel sorry for, feel empathy for, and even understand the behaviors. It doesn't mean you have to forgive it. In fact, I've never forgiven him for all of the things that he's done.
Did you ever, before you got into where you're at now, was there ever a point in those 22 years that you understood it?
No. I was completely clueless. I knew that he had a bad childhood. I knew that he drank too much and had an anger problem, but I had zero clue that all of those things together were causing him to behave the way that he was behaving towards me because he was hurt.
Right. So you didn't realize it until you were away from it, until it was, and you looked back at it.
Looking back on it, now I see textbook case, textbook. Yep.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it is, this is so fascinating to me. And I mean, you know, mental and emotional health is something, and being basically a lifelong sufferer of depression. I battled it my entire life. So mental health and emotional health is as important to me as physical health. You know, I've been blessed. I've been very lucky that I haven't had to really do much physically.
Sure.
Right. And I've just stayed healthy because of good genes. But on a superficial level, and you know, we are all superficial at times, I didn't pay attention to that because I thought, I'm healthy, I'm great. I wasn't.
No.
You know, and there's so much negative to be found in that neglect.
I think that when you're out of it and you start looking internally at your own stuff, because you can't change anybody else. The only person you can work on is you, right? When you really start to take ownership of what happened to me growing up, what happened to me in my childhood, what happened to me in my 20s, 30s, 40s. And I do a trauma timeline with my clients. We go through and we look at all of the things that were significant, that were huge, that happened to them in their life. Then you can unpack all of those things and you can start to see how they connect to make you who you are today. And then you get to choose. Do you want to put those things back in your suitcase and carry them around with you?
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. I mean, it really is.
For the rest of your life? Yeah. Do you want your history to really impact your future? Or are you going to say, okay, these things happened to me, and today is today. It's the present. It's a gift. What do I want to bring into the future? Am I going to unburden myself with all that stuff from the past that I cannot change?
Right.
But now I get to choose to move forward without that baggage and choose a different path for myself. And that's where the magic happens.
Right.
Post-traumatic growth. That's what I'm describing. So in spite of, and sometimes because of the things that you've gone through, you become a much better person. You're an example of that.
I love that concept though, because, you know, everybody knows post-traumatic stress, right?
Yep.
But post-traumatic growth now I've never heard that term. And that is exciting.
It is very
exciting.
You
know, and it's that has to be, the concept has to give a lot of people hope.
It does, because you can choose a different future. You can choose a better version of yourself. And the whole reason that I do what I do with positive psychology and with helping people with brain spotting and with hypnotherapy sessions, it's all about retraining your brain. What do you truly want? How do you want to show up in life? What kind of a parent do you want to be to your children? Can't change the past. I can't change what I did to my kids growing up. I put them through hell 4 times.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I can change how I show up for them now. I can change the way that I guide them. My relationship with my adult children is incredible. You know, I am truly so blessed by them.
That's awesome. I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah. And, you know, we are so close, so close. And, you know, I've fully supported them their whole entire life, and I continue to do that. But now I do it in a way that is healthy and setting them up for success for their futures too.
That's awesome. Now, is your son local?
Yeah, he is, right here in Pittsburgh.
And you said he went to West Point.
He went to West Point for a couple of years, hated the Army, got out, did a psychology degree at W&J, and then decided to become an attorney and just graduated from Duquesne. So, yeah.
Wow, he's real local. W&J, Duquesne, that's real local. And your military's not for everybody.
No, you know, it's not.
It's a thing. But I think that is so cool. The way your face just lit up when you were talking about that relationship is just amazing. That's wonderful.
So I did a lot of things wrong with them growing up.
Everybody does.
But guess what? We all do. And it's a case of, okay, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah. There's no perfect parent on earth.
No.
You know what I mean? I can sit right now and rattle off probably 25 things with my 3 kids that I would have done differently if I could do it again, that I would do differently now. You know, and I do differently with grandkids.
Yeah, of course. I can't wait for that.
It's a totally different thing. And the dynamic, you know, it's very difficult when your children become adults because you can't turn off parent mode.
No.
Right? And they don't need parenting.
No, they
and
don't.
if you keep trying to parent them, you're eventually you're just gonna really start to smother them, right? And they don't want that.
No.
So how to and you can't go from parent to friend.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's that fine line. So where's the balance in that?
Mm-hmm.
And what made that easy for me is grandkids.
Yeah.
Because you can indirectly keep parenting.
Sure,
you can still be the parent, but not directly.
Yeah.
So it's been a fascinating dynamic for me. You know, it's just really cool.
I cannot wait. Right now, I have a grand dog. That's as good as it gets.
That's a cool thing too, though. I have one of those too. I have a couple of. So one thing that we do, you know, if I know you've seen the podcast, I don't know how deep you've got into it, but what the blog that I write, the podcast that Nick and I do here is based on 5 pillars that I kind of picked up from my father over the years and kind of refined to fit me.
Yeah.
And it's live, love, learn, pray, and inspire. And one thing he said to me that always stuck with me is if you try to do those 5 things every day, you're going to have a pretty good day.
Yep.
Right? So of those 5 things, pick one that resonates with you and tell me why.
I would say inspire, because it would be really easy to have gone through that and become this bitter, twisted, miserable person and stayed single.
And nobody would have blamed you.
Yeah, nobody would blame me, being like, I totally understand, right?
Yeah.
But instead, I truly want to inspire other people that it will be okay. It can be better than you ever imagined it being. Just have to do the work. It's so important to look inside and do the work on yourself. And it doesn't matter what that person that did that to you is doing in their life. Who cares?
There you go.
You can and will have a much better future if you choose to be that way.
And you are inspiring, you know, from not only from your personal experience, but you went and got the knowledge, you got the science and the technology behind all of this to back it up. So that's wonderful. And you are very inspiring, my friend. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing a little bit of your story.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, our pleasure. Our pleasure.